He was the greatest hunter in humans, a man who had never known fear in his entire life. He had faced leopards, bush pigs, and the darkest nights this land could offer. But one night, deep inside Ajo Ohia, the wicked forest, he ran, he screamed, he fell, and he collapsed on the ground like a broken man. And when he lifted his eyes, something was standing right in front of him, something that could not be killed. This is the story of Ikenna. If this story touched you, drop a comment below and tell me, what is the one thing you have been too proud to face? Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and turn on your notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. This is OG Tale Story, and we will see you in the next one. There is a forest in this community that the elders do not name out loud after sunset. During the day, they will point at it. Yes, but only with a closed fist, never an open finger. To point an open finger at that forest is to invite whatever lives inside it to look back at you. The air around it carried a different kind of silence, the kind that does not feel empty, the kind that feels full of something that has been waiting for a very long time. The people of Umunze village called it simply Ajo Ohia, the wicked forest. For generations, not one man had entered it and returned the same. Life in Umunze went on as normal. Children played, women cooked, men laughed. But every evening, when the sun began to fall, eyes would drift toward that tree line. Nobody spoke about it. Nobody needed to. That forest was always there, always watching, always waiting. Until Ikenna decided he would be the first. Ikenna was not an ordinary man, and if you asked him, he would be the first to tell you so. Every village has one, the man whose name arrives before he does, the man that children run to greet, and elders acknowledge with a slow, careful nod. In Umunze, that man was Ikenna, and Ikenna knew it very well. By the age of 32, he had killed 3 bush pigs with a single spear throw. He had tracked a wounded leopard through the night, through rain, through complete darkness. He brought it back at dawn, tied to a bamboo pole, its eyes still wide open in disbelief. The village had never seen anything like it, and they never forgot. Every scar on his body was a story, and every story was a victory. There was no hunt that Ikenna had ever lost. His chest was a map of scars, and he wore each one like a title. He did not walk into a room, he arrived. He did not speak, he declared. When Ikenna laughed, the whole compound laughed with him. When Ikenna went silent, men around him became very careful. He was the kind of man that the whole village had built their confidence upon. But pride is a trap that builds itself slowly, quietly, without announcement. And Ikenna had been walking into it for years without even knowing. He had stopped listening to his wife Ola, who begged him not to take unnecessary risks. She would speak, and he would hear the words, but never truly receive them. A woman's worry, he told himself, was just a woman's worry. He did not understand that sometimes the people who love you most can see what you cannot. He had also stopped listening to old Matsuaki, the eldest hunter in all of Umunze. This man had once told him, the forest does not fear the man who is not afraid of it. It simply waits for him. Ikenna had heard those words, smiled slowly, and said nothing. What could an old man who no longer hunted tell him about the forest? He had no idea that those words were the most important words anyone had ever spoken to him. It was a night of palm wine and firelight when everything changed. The hunters had gathered to celebrate after a successful kill, full of food, full of drink. And the conversation turned, as it always does among men who have drunk enough, to the question of courage. Who among them had done the most dangerous thing? Who among them had gone the furthest? It was the kind of conversation that sounded like celebration, but always ended in a dare. Then someone mentioned Ajo Ohia. The fire seemed to shrink at the sound of it. Voices dropped, the laughter died. Eyes shifted toward the darkness beyond the camp. Nobody wanted to say the name again. Nobody wanted it said at all. The wicked forest had a way of making brave men suddenly very quiet. Even the night around them seemed to lean in and listen. And then, someone looked at Ikenna, not as a challenge, not with words, just a look, a thought, spoken with the eyes. If anyone could survive that forest, it would be this man. Ikenna caught that look, and held it, and turned it over in his mind. And then he saw something in the faces around him that he had never seen directed at him before. Doubt. He put down his palm wine cup, slowly, and looked around the circle of men. His friends, his brothers in hunting, the men who had always believed in him. And he said, "I will enter Ajo Ohia before the next moon. I will spend one night inside that forest, and I will come back and tell you what is there." The fire crackled. The night was silent, and not one man cheered. That silence was the first sign that he should have read. Ola wept that night, but she did not beg. She knew her husband far too well for begging. She simply wept, quietly, with her back turned to him as she lay on their mat. Her shoulders trembled softly in the darkness, and that quiet trembling was heavier than any argument. Ikenna sat on the edge of the mat and stared at the wall, saying nothing. He told himself she was being afraid over nothing. But somewhere deep inside him, somewhere he refused to look, he was not so sure. Matsuaki came to see him the following morning, before the dew had even left the ground. The old man sat across from Ikenna in the courtyard, and for a long time, said absolutely nothing. Between them, there was only the sound of the birds and the distant village noise. Ikenna waited, arms folded, face relaxed, the picture of a man who had already made up his mind. The elder studied him, the way only a man who has seen much can study another. Then, he began to speak. "Ikenna, there are things in this world that do not fight you with claws or teeth. They fight you with what is already inside you. That forest, whatever lives inside it, does not kill the body first. It goes for the part of you that you have never examined, the part that you're most proud of. That is where it enters." Ikenna listened. He nodded. He said he understood. He thanked the old man. He walked him to the compound gate. He watched him leave. Then he turned back toward his house, his mind already set, his decision already made. He understood the words, the way a man understands a warning in a language he does not truly speak. The meaning reached his ears, but it never reached his heart. He did not understand, and that would cost him everything. That evening, he prepared himself with the quiet confidence of a man who has never truly lost. His best spear, sharpened until the tip caught the last light of the sun. His machete, clean and ready, the same blade that had taken down a leopard. He packed fire. He packed food. He packed 32 years of fearlessness. As he worked, he could feel Ola watching him from inside the house, but he did not turn. He was ready, he told himself, for anything. He did not look back as he walked away into the darkening evening. But Ola stood at the doorway of their home, her hands gripping the frame on both sides. She watched the broad back of her husband grow smaller in the distance. She watched him move toward the tree line, steady, fearless, certain. Her lips pressed together, her eyes full of something she could not name. Because when a man has already decided, there is nothing left for the people who love him to say. He entered Ajo Ohia on a Thursday night, and the forest swallowed him slowly. That is the only word for what it did. It swallowed him. The trees here were older and taller than anything he had seen in 32 years of hunting. Their roots rose from the ground like the knuckles of buried giants. Their trunks were so wide, 3 men with arms stretched could not circle one. And the darkness between them was not like ordinary darkness. The moment he stepped deep enough, the canopy closed above him like a hand closing into a fist. And suddenly, the moonlight was gone. The sounds of the forest changed, not louder, but quieter. The insects stopped, the night birds went silent, the wind disappeared entirely, as if the forest itself had taken a long breath, and was now holding it. Ikenna gripped his spear and kept walking, but his steps had become just a little more careful. He found a clearing between 3 ancient trees and built himself a small fire. He sat beside it, spear across his lap, and looked into the flames. He told himself, He was not afraid. He told himself this a second time, then a third. The forest around him said nothing, and that silence was beginning to feel like an answer. Hours passed, and nothing moved, nothing called, nothing came. The forest was simply still, ancient and dark and utterly quiet. Ikenna leaned back, and a slow smile crossed his face. Was this the feared Ajo Ohia, the wicked forest that had terrorized his village for generations? A quiet place full of old trees and cold air? He almost laughed, because something in the dark would not let him laugh completely. And then the fire went out. Not slowly, not from wind, not from lack of fuel. It simply stopped, mid-flame, as if something had reached out an invisible hand and closed it. One moment there was fire, and the next there was absolute darkness. Ikenna was on his feet before he even knew he had stood up. His heart was beating, in a way it had never beaten before. In the darkness that followed, Ikenna heard breathing. Not a leopard, not a bush pig, not any animal he had ever tracked in 32 years. This was something different, something that breathed the way a mountain would breathe if mountains breathed. Slow, ancient, and completely certain. A breathing that did not hurry, because whatever was breathing had nowhere to rush to. It had all the time in the world. Then he saw it. It did not have a clear shape, and that was the most terrifying thing about it. It was tall, taller than the trees around it, and it moved the way smoke moves, but with intention. Its eyes were 2 points of red-orange light, steady, unblinking, ancient. Where it stood, the air became cold, and where it looked, the ground seemed to darken further. Ikenna's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He threw his spear with everything he had, every muscle, every year of training behind it. It passed through the entity, as though the thing was made entirely of night itself. He raised his machete, the same blade that had never failed him, and he swung. He cut nothing. The blade passed through darkness and found only more darkness. And then, Ikenna felt something that his body had never produced before. His hands were shaking. He screamed, not from pain, but from a terror so deep it bypassed his mind entirely. It came straight from his bones, from somewhere older than thought, older than pride. And then Ikenna, the greatest hunter in humans, ran. He ran harder than he had ever run in his entire life, crashing through undergrowth, through branches that tore at his face and arms. He ran without direction, without thought, without any plan except to get away. The great Ikenna was running, and he could not stop. He ran until his legs simply refused to carry him any further. He collapsed against the root of a great tree, gasping, bleeding, completely and utterly broken. His spear was gone. His machete was somewhere behind him in the dark. His chest heaved, his hands pressed against the ground, his body shaking. 32 years of victories, 32 years of scars and pride and fearlessness. And here he was, on the ground, in the dark, with nothing left. He stayed there, gasping, eyes closed, telling himself to breathe. When he finally opened his eyes and slowly lifted his head, it was standing right in front of him. He had not heard it follow. There had been no footsteps, no sound, no warning. It had simply arrived. The red-orange eyes, low and close now, looking directly at him, waiting. Ikenna closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he had nothing to offer. No weapon, no strength, no plan, no pride left to stand behind. He was nothing, and he knew it, and the knowing of it was strangely very quiet. And so, without planning to, without deciding to, he stopped fighting. He opened his hands, palms facing upward, and he opened his eyes, and he looked directly at it. The moment he stopped resisting, something in the forest shifted. The cold began to leave the air slowly, like a breath being released after being held too long. The red-orange eyes softened. They did not disappear, but they softened. The way a father's eyes soften when a stubborn child finally stops fighting and finally listens. The shape of the thing became less terrifying, not because it changed, but because Ikenna's eyes were finally seeing clearly. For the first time, he was looking without fear in the way. It spoke, not with a mouth, but with something older than mouths, older than language, and it showed him things. He felt the weight of every single moment he had turned away from Ola's voice. Every time she had spoken her worry to him and he had dismissed it like the wind. He felt it all, not as memory, but as feeling, deep and heavy in the center of his chest. He had been loved fully, completely, and he had never truly received it. Then he felt the loneliness of Matsuaki, sitting in that courtyard alone. An old man who had poured his wisdom into a younger man who smiled and walked away. He felt the quiet sadness of a person whose words land and leave no mark. Matsuaki had not come to him out of fear, he had come out of love. And Ikenna had nodded and thanked him and understood nothing. He felt the weight of that now, and it was heavier than any leopard he had ever carried. And then he felt the truth about his own pride, the thing he had never allowed himself to examine. That constant, exhausting performance of fearlessness every single day for an audience that never stopped watching. He felt how much energy it had taken all those years to maintain the image of the great Ikenna. How little of himself had been left over for the people who actually loved him. He felt how small a man becomes when he spends his whole life trying to appear large. The forest held him in that truth and would not let him look away. And then Ikenna wept. The greatest hunter in humans, the man whose hands had never shaken, wept like a boy. He sat at the root of that ancient tree, deep inside the wicked forest, and he let it all come. Every tear was something he had refused to feel for years: pride, fear, loneliness, love. He did not try to stop it. He did not wipe his face. He did not look around to see who was watching. There was nobody watching, except the forest, and the forest did not judge him. He walked out of Ajo Ohia at dawn, and this time he was not running. He walked slowly, with no spear, no machete, no performance of courage. His head was not raised in triumph. It was bowed in something much quieter than triumph. He stepped from the darkness of the trees into the soft gold of early morning, and with every step toward the light, something inside him settled. The way a river settles after the storm has passed, and the water finds its level again. The villagers who had gathered at the forest edge, and they had gathered because Humans was a village, and villages always watch, saw a man emerge from the tree line. Same face, same broad shoulders, same chest full of scars. But the eyes were different. Nobody cheered, nobody called his name. They simply watched him walk toward them in silence. Because even from a distance, even without words, they could all see it. Something had changed in Ikenna, and whatever it was permanent. Ola ran to him the moment she saw him, across the open ground, wrapper flying behind her. She did not call his name. She did not ask if he was hurt. She simply ran, and Ikenna opened his arms and received her, the way a man receives water after a long drought. He held her for a long time without speaking, without explaining, without any words at all. Because some things that happen to a man in the dark have no words yet. They can only be held quietly in the arms of someone who waited. When Matsuaki walked slowly toward him through the gathered crowd, Ikenna did not stand tall. He did not say, "I told you I would make it." He did not smile the smile of a man who had won. He sat down on the ground at the old man's feet, and he said, quietly, "Teach me what you know." Matsuaki was still for a long moment. Then he lowered himself and sat beside him, not above him, beside him. And between the two men, a slow, dignified nod passed that said everything words could not. Some battles are not won with spears. Some of the most dangerous things a man will ever face in his life are not animals, not enemies, not even dark forests. They are the parts of himself that he has never been willing to look at. Ikenna entered Ajo Ohia as the greatest hunter in humans, a man full of pride and empty of peace. He faced a beast, and the beast showed him himself, and that is why he found peace.